Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building.
Yes, indeed.
2020 presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Beto. Been waiting to talk to you, man. What do you think? First of all, what do you think happened? You know, when you were running for Senate, you had a real spark going, like you was hot. But now running for president, it's not the same momentum. What do you think happened?
It's a different race. Mm-hmm. In the Senate, it's Beto O'Rourke versus Ted Cruz, about the clearest choice that you could possibly have. And it was also the most unlikely campaign ever. Texas last elected a Democrat statewide in 1994. So against the odds, going to be completely impossible. And yet this campaign, this guy is going to every one of the 254 counties, and it just built over time. This race is a little bit different and a little more challenging. Instead of one other candidate, there are 20 other candidates, and they're amazing. Every single one of them bringing skills or expertise or life experience that's incredibly compelling. The country's also a lot bigger than Texas, so a lot more time to visit everyone, be there, answer questions, connect, and reflect that back in the campaign that we're running. But any race that I've ever been a part of, I ran for city council in 2005, ran against an incumbent member of Congress in 2012, always been low in the polls for a while, always been running against the odds or against the conventional political wisdom, have always been able to break through and break out. This one's tough, though. No two ways.
Do you ever ask yourself, what happened to Beyonce? What happened to LeBron? All of these people that were wearing my hats and wearing my shirts, and what happened? Where that support went?
It's not support that I'm entitled to or that I felt was going to come as a matter of course in this race. Again, I think, in the case of LeBron or Beyonce, they saw this very clear choice, Beto or Ted Cruz. Beto, the guy who had answered this question from someone who said, hey, don't you think it's disrespectful to veterans and service members when NFL players take a knee on the field? And that I was able to answer that question honestly, maybe against the advice of those who wanted to see me win that election in Texas. What are you doing, Beto? You can't say that. It's too honest. But I think that honesty helped to break through to people who might otherwise have been unaware or uninterested in that race. But, that was that race. That was then. This is this race. This is now. And I've got to prove myself again. And nothing easy about that, and nothing that I can take for granted. But I want to make this clear. Extraordinarily lucky that I get to be in this and work with the amazing team that I do, meet the amazing people that I see across the country, and be on the stage with some extraordinary candidates, any one of whom would be light years better than the current occupant of the White House.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that bar is so low, though.
That is a
I don't like when
very
people
low
say
bar.
that. That bar is so low.
I think my son could do a good job. And what did you think of Trump's briefing of killing of the ISIS leader? We discussed it briefly here, and I was like, sounded like a little harsh. Like, that sounded like somebody might want revenge. It was just nasty. What were your thoughts?
It's hard to not compare that with the way that President Obama responded after we had killed bin Laden. There's something about displaying your strength with reserve. We're the strongest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet that the world has ever known. You don't need to beat your chest about it. You don't need to talk about your enemies whimpering or crying or dying like a
That's
dog.
what I said.
That's to me some third-rate tin pot dictator. It's not the United States of America.
You saying he shouldn't have spiked the football? What do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He spiked the football and did a dance.
Yeah.
And maybe also start out by thanking those who made it
Who
possible.
were involved.
Right.
Who were there.
Those Kurdish fighters who have been shoulder to shoulder with us, who really, in many ways, ensure that we don't have to send more U.S. service members over to Syria or Iraq. I think that could go a long way, not just in honoring their service, but also indicating to the next potential ally, we're a very good friend to have, and we will never forget our friendship, and will always meet our end of the obligation. Trump's significantly diminished that by withdrawing from northern Syria, diminishing the role that the Kurds played, I think making it harder for us to develop the friends and allies we'll need going forward in the world. So wasn't a big fan of his response.
Let me play white devil's advocate for a second, right? If the guy was so bad, what's his name? Badcock? What's his name? What was the bad guy name?
Baghdadi.
If Baghdadi was so bad, why do we care what somebody says about him? I mean, you killed him. Or caused him to kill himself, whatever it was.
Yeah. I think for those reasons of ensuring that the rest of the world sees us at our best, that we acknowledge that we are much stronger, much more secure, much safer when we have friends and allies, and we give credit to them when that credit is due. There's I don't know the word for it. When I think about President Obama, I think of grace or graciousness or this quiet strength, and to me that's America at its best. The chest thumping, the ego-driven politics. Donald Trump, for me, that's America at its worst. So there was something in his reaction that showed us who he is, and really reflected on all of us, I think, poorly. That's not the message we want to send to the rest of the world. And to be clear, it's not a mission accomplished moment. Though we got al-Baghdadi, ISIS is still alive and well. That threat is still there.
It's not over.
It's not
and
over.
it's probably a distraction too from other things that he has going on with the impeachment and everything. I'm sure he's like, okay, let's shift our attention here, and that might get him some support if he's overdoing it.
I'm sure that there's nothing that Donald Trump does that doesn't have some personal calculation.
Ulterior motives.
That's right. So maybe the way in which he announced it, or the fact that most of those who understand this far better than I do, military experts say that this raid was successful despite Donald Trump, because his precipitous withdrawal of U.S. service members, his turning his back to the Kurds, made it less, not more likely that we'd be successful. And from what I've read, we had to significantly speed up the operation, take greater risks and chances than we otherwise would have. Thank God it worked out. Thank God none of our U.S. service members' lives were taken in the process. But we shouldn't have been put in that position in the first place, and that's owing to Donald Trump.
Let's talk about you, though, because talking about Trump not going to get you up in these polls, right? So when you look at your polling, why do you think you haven't broken through like some of the other candidates?
I think for some of the reasons that we discussed at the outset, just the extraordinary field, the number of people who are running, the fact that my kind of campaigning does not rely on TV ads. We have not aired one of them yet. It's not going to be sound bites or bumper stickers. It's literally going to communities, engaging, answering questions like I am with you right now, and bringing people into the conversation. It's a slow, laborious, and as the candidate, sometimes really frustrating process not to see that reflected in the polls. But I think it is the truest, the most honest, and the most long-lasting way to build support. It almost builds, I don't know the best analogy, but like a wave over time that builds and builds and builds. That's what we did in Texas over those 254 counties. And look, I'll also acknowledge what's got to be on your mind. We didn't win in Texas, but we got closer than any Democrat had before, won more votes than any Democrat had, won independents for the first time in decades, helped 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats, replace Republicans, 17 African-American women elected to judicial positions in Harris County, Houston, Texas, literally changing the face of criminal justice in the largest, most diverse city in our state. And that happened through a 2-year slog where my polling at the outset was in the low single digits, just like it is today. So this grassroots effort really requires time and requires me being on the ground. And that's why I'm traveling, I think, to a greater degree than any other candidate, holding more town halls, answering more questions. At some point, to answer your question, Charlamagne, that's got to be reflected and break through in the polls. I'm going to need people who amplify that message through their own networks, online and at work, at school, in their families, in their neighborhoods. That's what's happened in every single race. And if this is meant to happen, it'll happen in this race as well. I've got to have some trust in that.
How often do you yell fuck at the polls? Like you see the poll, you see your low point, and you're like, fuck.
That comes up a lot right now. And I'll tell you why. as you know, the threshold to qualify for that debate stage depends on performance in polling.
Some say it's rigged. Some say it's rigged by the DNC. It's more of a popularity contest than anything.
It certainly makes it harder for someone who, unlike Tom Steyer, cannot fund his way onto TV and onto high polling, or who is unwilling to spend in early states just to get your name and face out on TV, to raise ID, to ensure that those who answer the polls respond with your name. It's really not based as a hope we'd want it to be on a competition of ideas or vision or track record or experience.
How could you do that, you think? Would you do it differently to see who could qualify for those debates?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think this problem of having 15 to 20 candidates is a really good problem for our democracy to have.
Really?
You want that? Yeah, you want that kind of competition. If we are purported to be the world's greatest democracy, let's prove it. And it doesn't mean that you need to have all candidates on the same stage on the same night. I think, and I could be wrong, our attention span can handle 2 nights of debates with maybe 8 candidates on a stage at each time, instead of answering in 45 seconds about some of the most complex policy issues. What if you had 2 minutes to lay out a vision on healthcare or immigration or criminal justice reform or climate change? That might be a way to improve the process, to make sure that as you're watching at home, you get a little bit better idea of who we are, how we would propose to lead this country, and then what the difference is between these different candidates in this unprecedented field that we see. But yeah, this polling stuff is hard. No 2 ways about it.
Can we clarify some things about gun control with you? Because I see that's been an issue that you've been speaking on quite frequently, and your ideas have evolved. So can we discuss that?
Yeah, you trying to take American guns away? That's what she's asking. That's what we heard. You're trying to take the Americans' guns.
I'd say weapons of war, as distinct from a shotgun, a hunting rifle, a handgun. Yes, to answer your question very directly and honestly, yes. I don't want you to have an AR-15 or an AK-47. And yes, I acknowledge that most who own those weapons own them responsibly.
For
they're not going to go out and, well, I'm not much of a hunter. Listening to hunters, it's hard to hunt with an AR-15 or an AK-47.
You're ruining the meat.
You're ruining the meat. There's nothing left at the end of it.
Or Bambi.
So who would need that?
It's designed for war. So the AR-15, AK-47, originally engineered and sold to the militaries of the world because they're just amazing, incredibly effective, devastating at killing people efficiently and in great numbers. Dayton, Ohio, AR-15, 9 people killed in under 40 seconds. El Paso, Texas, August 3rd, the day before Dayton, 22 killed in under 3 minutes with an AK-47. When they conceived and ratified and adopted the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, it took you 3 minutes to reload your musket. I don't know that they could envision the damage that one of these weapons of war could do. So keep that stuff on the battlefield where it belongs. Ensure that we have background checks for handguns or long guns or hunting rifles. Employ extreme risk protection orders. So if someone has a firearm and poses a risk to themselves, we lose 22,000 people a year to gun suicide in America, or a risk to someone else. Ensure that through due process, we take that firearm from them before they can hurt themselves or someone else. Go ahead.
So where should our focus be? Should it be keeping guns out of the wrong hands or keeping certain guns out of everybody's hands? Because, there's some people who have assault weapons who don't commit those kind of crimes.
That's absolutely right. I think it has to be both. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think there's something unique about these weapons of war in the terror that they have produced. Talking to those who survived that Walmart shooting in El Paso, Texas on August 3rd, kids who were hunted down, talked to some of their parents. These kids hid in a bakery at that Walmart, and the gunman with that AK-47 says, "Kids, I know you're in there. Come on out." That's going to stay with them forever, but it's also going to stay with other kids and children who have heard those stories and who worry or fear that they're going to be the victims of one of these mass terror attacks. That guy who killed those people in El Paso, Texas, was inspired by this president. He said he was going to repel an invasion of immigrants and asylum seekers. When the police caught him afterwards, he said, "I came to kill Mexicans." It was well-armed racism turned against people who were absolutely defenseless. Univision just did a poll in Texas. More than 80% of Hispanic Texans say they fear they will be the victims of one of those mass terror attacks. So those weapons of war are unique in that every one of them is a potential instrument of terror. But it also means that we have to have background checks on handguns. And we can't just do it in one city or one state. It has to be universal in the country. I was just in Chicago, and I was meeting with mothers who lost their sons to gun violence. In some cases, violence where the perpetrator was never caught. In other cases, the perpetrator was a police officer who was able to kill their child with complete impunity. No justice years down the road. That's very different from what we're talking about with AR-15s, AK-47s, but just as important to get right. And so it means that we have to ensure that we're protecting the lives of everyone in every community, in every part of this country, and understand that in some communities, some young people feel like they have to have a firearm on them in order to protect their lives, in order to be okay at the end of the day. And that's not okay in America. So we got to work on that. I met this group while we were there. It was the this group called the Muslim Inner City Action Network. The Inner City Muslim Action Network, IMAN. And they work on violence prevention and intervention. So that's not about who has guns, who doesn't have guns. It's about resolving conflict peacefully, non-violently before you ever get to that point. They're doing extraordinary work on the ground.
But that's kind of like social emotional learning as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We should have that in every school in America. So in addition to the classroom instruction, we're looking at the full social, emotional well-being of every child who is there. What an amazing, effective investment if we made it up front when our kids are 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, then waiting down the line to try to repair the damage done when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. So that makes a ton of sense to me.
What about in the police department, too? What are some things that we can do with police brutality? And what are your thoughts about a Tatiana Jefferson? What should happen to the police officer who killed her?
He should be brought to justice. I just met a Tatiana or Tay Jefferson's sisters, Amber and Ashley, when I was in Grand Prairie, Texas, 2 weeks ago. It had been less than a week since she had been shot. You know, for those who were listening and aren't aware of the story, in her own home with her 8-year-old nephew, harming, threatening, doing nothing to nobody, shot by a white police officer who was on her property through her bedroom window. Not more than a few dozen miles from where Botham Jean, a black man the year before, had been shot by Amber Geiger, a white police officer, in his own home, not doing anything to anyone. And what Amber and Ashley said that really got to me is she said, I don't feel safe anywhere. Not out on the street, not in a friend's home, not at a club, not in a restaurant, not even in my own home. That's where we are in America today. And if there's not accountability, to your question about what should happen to that police officer, if there are not consequences, if there is not justice, then we have sent the message that this is okay. And
it will sent that message to black people a long time ago.
It will continue.
Like, what does justice look like? Like, I mean, you said it will continue, but it's been continuing. This is decades. What is justice? What does that look like? It
means that if the district attorney is unwilling to take action, then we make this a federal civil rights priority, and we bring the full weight and resources of the Department of Justice and the Attorney General to bear on these cases wherever they are in the country, whether it is Fort Worth or Dallas or Ferguson, Missouri. And we make sure that we send an unmistakable signal that there will be consequences for this kind of action. We tie any federal funding to any police department or sheriff's office to their ability to transparently report on use of force and against whom that is used. And then we got to make sure that there is intensive training for those police officers and sheriff's deputies, and really also school teachers. I think about the fact that in Texas, a 4 or 5-year-old child in a kindergarten classroom is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled if she is a child of color versus a white kid for the same infraction in front of the same teacher in the same school. So that criminal justice challenge that we have that is expressed in police violence against unarmed black women and black men really begins when a child is 4 or 5 years old and absolutely defenseless against that system into which she has been born. It's not just restricted, as I know you know, to police officers, although that is an awful example of this. It is every single part of American life today: education, healthcare, the economy, and yes, the criminal justice system that has these shootings of unarmed black men and black women, but also has almost 2.5 million people behind bars right now.
So
largest prison population on the planet, disproportionately comprised of people of color.
So how do you train white people not to be afraid of black people? That's essentially what it is.
Yeah. I think part of it has to be in telling the full story of this country, of how we got to this place. How did we get to 2.5 million people behind bars, disproportionately comprised of people of color? How do we get to that situation I just described in that kindergarten classroom?
You got to tell the true story. And the true story is that the white man has been inherently violent in America.
Absolutely.
That's the truth, not us.
The foundation of this country is an extraordinarily brutal one. I think of Nicole Hannah-Jones, the 1619 Project, the case that she makes that has persuaded me that you mark the foundation of America not on the 4th of July, 1776, but the 20th of August, 1619. The first time someone was kidnapped from West Africa, brought here against their will, made to build the wealth, the success, the greatness of America, which neither they nor their descendants alive today are able to fully participate in. And we know that from any way we can cut it or measure it. 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. And it's not accidental. It's by design. I just had a chance to go to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And it talks about how after Reconstruction, starting in 1877, there is a wave of white terror, organized white terrorism in this country that lasts all the way through 1950. And then following that museum and going to the Memorial to Peace and Justice and seeing the name of almost every single African-American child and woman and man who was beat or dragged or drowned or burned or hung for the color of their skin. At the end of the Legacy Museum, you pass by a display of the 13th Amendment, which ostensibly, and I always understood from the history books and frankly as a white guy, that was one of our proudest achievements. That ended slavery in America. But it also allowed slavery by another name, because there's an exception in the 13th Amendment that allows for mass incarceration and frankly directs that against communities of color to extraordinary levels of success based on that intent. And it's not just that prison population today. Recently, just outside of Houston, Texas, in Fort Bend, they're building a new school. And as they were clearing the ground, they began to find bones and this mass grave site. It is a grave of workers, black men and black children, who were arrested based on the color of their skin to work on the imperial sugar plantation long after slavery had ended, well into the 20th century. And when they do the forensic work on those bones, they can see that muscles were literally torn from those bones. Those people were worked to death, buried in this graveyard. That is a function of America's brutality, of our criminal justice system, of the 13th Amendment. And so to answer your question, or to begin to answer your question, everyone in this country needs to know that story. This didn't happen by accident. This is not a recent development. This goes back 400 years and will continue going forward indefinitely until we all understand what is happening. And for my understanding, that is the very beginning of reparations. And when I listened to Sheila Jackson Lee, member of Congress from Houston, not too far from Fort Bend, or Brian Stevenson, who's been so powerful and eloquent on this issue, bringing every American onto the same page of history is fundamental precondition to actually making any change. He reminded me that in Germany, post-Holocaust, everyday Germans were made to go to the concentration camps, to the gas chambers, so they could never deny what had happened in their name. In South Africa, you had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was the beginning of justice. In Rwanda, Hutus and Tutsis brought to the same table. In America, nothing even close. Never made to have that conversation. Until we do, I agree with you, nothing's going to change.
But how do we change that narrative? How do we make sure that We have the same education. We have the same health care. We can get loans. We can be entrepreneurs. We can, build our own communities.
I don't want to skim past the reparations thing. Because are you pandering? Because you didn't get on the reparations train until your campaign didn't start the way you wanted it to.
This is something that I've been talking about from the very beginning of my travels across Texas, listening to people, not understanding, again, because of who I am and who my kids are.
So you just learned, basically.
Yeah, but by listening to people, I mean that. I
was about to say, 'cause that whole spiel just fell.
But it's the advocacy for it is from you has been kind of new. That's why I say. That's why I asked, is it pandering?
Yeah,
but it seems like you got new information.
No, it's a function of listening to people. Being in Orange, Texas, in the east part of the state last year, and someone says, "What are you going to do about the Confederate Memorial?" And I get this question in different places in Texas because there are Confederate memorials everywhere, in almost every county, in front of almost every single county courthouse. It's the place of pride that you look up to. And I said to the person who asked me the question, well, I think we should tear it down. And they said, no. The Confederate memorial that is going up right now, that we're building in Orange, Texas. I didn't know that. Wouldn't have known that if I had not been there. Didn't know about the disparity in discipline in kindergarten classrooms until I met the mothers and fathers of kids who had experienced that. And now I know when you see that video of that 6-year-old girl who's arrested and cuffed for throwing a tantrum in an elementary school classroom, that's not the exception. That in fact turns out to be the rule in much of America. So I want to acknowledge the truth of your question or your criticism. You're right. As a white guy, I have not experienced or lived or known this and wouldn't have until I listened to and went to folks who had experienced this in their lives and shared their stories with me, which were compelling enough for me to make this a leading issue, not just in my campaign, but I hope in my life. I want to see this country fulfill its promise. We are nowhere close now. And in fact, thanks to this president, we're going in the opposite direction right now. Hate crimes on the rise, every single one of the last 3 years. If you do not look like, love like, pray like the majority in this country, watch out. Because he has invited out into the open a racism that was long part of this country, systemic, endemic, foundational, a hatred that is on the loose, not just in El Paso, but Victoria, Texas. The day after he signs his executive order attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States, the mosque is burned to the ground. The synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not an accident. That guy is raving about caravans and asylum seekers and wealthy Jews who are financing them coming to this country. So this is a real moment of test, not only to repel that, not only not to be racist, but to be anti-racist, to be intentional, to think about how we got here and what it's going to take for us to get out.
So those conversations is the reason why you're thinking more about reparations? Is that what you basically said?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think until I can just use my experience as the example, until you understand or begin to understand where this country is, how it got this way, the gross disparities, you mentioned all of these policy issues. I mentioned the 10 times the wealth in white America than black America, but we have a maternal mortality crisis in Texas. It's 4 times as deadly for women of color. You have minority, majority school districts that are underfunded in this country to the tune of about $23 billion annually. Segregation in public education that is worse today in 2019 than on the eve of Brown versus Board in 1954. Voting, Texas was 50th in voter turnout before 2018, not because we love democracy less than you do in New York, but literally our state legislature would draw you out of a congressional district based on the color of your skin, to diminish the power of your vote or the likelihood that we would ever hear your voice. Stacey Abrams is the governor of Georgia right now, but for the purging of hundreds of thousands of names on the voter rolls in that state. So
Andrew Gillum in Florida.
Andrew Gillum in Florida still being attacked long after that race because of the threat that he poses. Those who he helped or tried to help enfranchise or re-enfranchise into the democracy, being attacked by the status quo, powers that be. And if you do not acknowledge that race is central to why that is happening, then you're completely missing the boat in this country. And there are steps that we can take. I mean, in education, we propose funding that $23 billion gap. When it comes to maternal health care, we talk about making sure that there are home health care visits, that we include doulas and midwives to go to homes because we know that they improve outcomes. We make sure that universal health care means everyone gets care in this country. We talk about ensuring that following the redlining, that loans are made in communities of color, that we acknowledge that Black women are starting and growing businesses at 14 times the rate of the rest of the economy. So not only should we make sure that they are able to get capital because they've long been denied it, but it's good for everyone that they're going to hire. It's good for this economy. But I think all of that becomes more possible when you have a conscious conversation about reparations in this country. And Sheila Jackson Lee's bill, I think, is one of the best ways to start that conversation. It's not the be-all, end-all.
HR 40? What are you talking about? What bill?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't think that's the easy way out, though? Because it's like every candidate is talking about HR 40 instead of like really advocating for like a solid plan of reparations, like a solid plan for Black people. Like Mayor Pete has a solid plan, a solid Black agenda. I know you don't like Mayor Pete, but...
Oh, I like him. Yeah.
It just seems like y'all got a little rivalry going in the debates. Like he comes at you real hard.
Yeah.
But you don't think HR 40 is the easy way out? It's easy to say, yeah, I support HR 40, as opposed to having a real plan, a real Black agenda.
To be clear, HR 40 is not the answer. I think it's an important step in the right direction. Some of the other things that we've talked about, addressing disparity in educational funding, mentioned those $23 billion, but also going beyond just equality and looking at equity. So our plan also calls for more teachers in those classrooms who look like the students in front of them. We're going to invest in teacher training academies at minority-serving institutions and historically Black colleges and universities so that we have a greater, stronger pipeline of teachers coming into those schools and then end that pipeline out of those schools that's leading to jails and to prisons right now. We're talking about addressing the disparity in lending by doubling the size of community development financing institutions to get more small business loans out into the community. I mentioned how we address disparities in healthcare and a new Voting Rights Act so that what happened in Georgia, what has been happening in Texas, what you just saw in Florida can never happen again in this country. We're violating both the spirit and now the letter of the law when it comes to equal access to the ballot box. So yes, there's a plan in every single one of those areas. But I do think, and HR 40 is not easy, or we would have gotten there by now. I do think having that conversation is so important, and ensuring that everyone's voices are reflected in that conversation. Everyone has a chance to talk about and answer the question you just posed. What would this look like monetarily? What would this look like in the different actions in the different policy areas? I don't know that you want any one person to decide that. I think the country needs to be brought in to that conversation. HR 40 helps us to have that conversation.
Does Beto O'Rourke have a consistent campaign message? Because it seems like you're all over the place. Like it's reparations, it's gun violence. Like when people think Beto O'Rourke, do they know what his message is?
I'm unafraid to take on any power, any interest, any status quo that prevents us from realizing our potential. So on guns, you were never supposed to talk about a mandatory buyback of AR-15s or AK-47s. That was just the third rail. But after El Paso, after Dayton, after so many of these shootings, we said we don't care. We're going to talk about what is important, what we know to be true, regardless of the political consequences. Talking about legalizing marijuana, not in 2019, but in 2009, writing a book about it. You weren't supposed to do that. That was another third rail in politics. But we understood its connection to mass incarceration. We understood its connection to Ciudad Juarez, our sister city in Mexico, being literally the deadliest city on planet Earth because kids were willing to kill or die for the privilege of bringing that drug across into this country. Addressing issues of marriage equality, again, a decade ago, because we're unafraid. Running for Senate in Texas, running for president now, talking about the issues that matter most to people, regardless of how popular they are or how well they poll, because we know this is going to be a defining moment of truth. So being afraid in the face of all of that is consistent. Bringing people in who've never been part of the conversation is consistent. I mentioned Texas being 50th in voter turnout before 2018. By going to every county, by going to not just colleges and community colleges, but high schools and bringing young people in. We had a record turnout in Texas. It eclipsed anything that we'd seen before. So being unafraid to bring everyone in on any issue, not just one, but all of the issues, I think that's consistent.
So you don't have a consistent campaign message per se, but you are consistent.
I feel like I am consistent.
People know you as the guy who just says fuck all the time.
Yeah, well, I can do that. I can do that, and I'm going to say that when it is the most honest thing to say. So when after the El Paso shooting, inspired by Donald Trump, a reporter sticks a microphone in my face and says, "Do you think that Donald Trump is racism or that Donald Trump has anything to do with this?" It's absolutely the appropriate thing to say, "What the fuck? How can you be asking me this question?" A guy who described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, who said to 4 women of color, duly elected by their constituents, they should go back to their home country, or calls Klansmen very fine people. Yeah, what the fuck? You don't get to ask that question as a member of press. That issue has already been settled. Why
the press asked that? The press asked that because even when y'all respond, you still ask questions. Like you're saying, well, the guy said Mexicans are this, and the guy said that. Why not just say, fuck yeah, he's a racist?
Oh, I've said yes from the outset, yeah. But I've said yes so long, and for someone who knows better to ask that as an open-ended question invites confusion on the part of the public. They may say, you know what? People tell me, like Beto O'Rourke has been saying Donald Trump is a white supremacist, is a racist, is part of the problem in this country. And yet I see members of the media asking this as though this is an undecided question. Maybe I'm missing something. So I think we have to see this clearly, speak honestly, and act decisively. I think that's what the country needs at this moment.
Well, he has to go, Charlamagne.
He gotta go.
Yeah, he has to go.
The fuck?
What the fuck? Now, is it because is it Beto? Is it Beto? Is it because we didn't say it 3 different times this morning?
Yeah, Beto. Like you're making a bet.
Beto O'Rourke.
Can you just answer this one question about the Democratic Party?
Yeah.
It's so young and diverse. You named yourself and Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum, but the 3 leading candidates are 3 white 70-year-olds. Like, what should we make of that? And how does that impact like younger candidates like yourself?
I think it's a reflection of where power has always been in this country. But I also think it is a reflection of where we are in the race. We're 100 days out from when the first decisions are going to be made on caucus night in Iowa. A ton of time. And we all know from the history of these presidential campaigns, very often there were people polling in the single digits in October of the year before, 100 days out, who then rose to take the top of the field. Others who were polling well ahead of everyone else who dropped behind. So
the polls are changing. You believe Joe Biden when he says that he didn't want Obama to endorse him?
No. No. For as much as he invokes the president's name, I think that's a big part of the case that he's making. But I think...
That's like when a girl ask a girl to go out and she was like, I'm not going out with you. Like, I didn't want to go with you anyway.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. No, I think we all revere President Obama, all know that he set the standard, not for our party, but for this country. And I think everyone in America is thinking about that, about how much we miss him. And that's certainly part of the decision-making process for people. How do we get back to some level of sanity? How do we get back to something far better than we have right now? But also, how do we go forward in a way that addresses some of these underlying fundamental challenges that we've all talked about today that were still there at the end of the Obama presidency? I think that's the question also that's on people's minds right now.
I know you got to go. My last question. Vanity Fair said you were born for this. But now that you've seen yourself sinking in the polls, do you still feel like you're born for this?
No one is born for this. No one is entitled to this. Everyone must earn the support, the votes, the commitments to caucus of the people out there. And the only way I know how to do that is to show up and be there where people are and include them in the conversation. Reflect their stories, their interests, their concerns, their passions. And then the people are going to decide the outcome. And I trust the wisdom of the people of this country. All I can do is show up and make sure that I'm part of the process.
Do you think you should have listened to some of the people in Texas who wanted you to focus on running for the Senate again as opposed to running for president? You think you should have listened?
No. If I am the nominee, we can win Texas. That's 38 electoral college votes, more than any other state. That puts Donald Trump away once and forever. It also ensures that we help those who are down ballot. So whoever takes on John Cornyn as a Democratic nominee for Senate will be helped if I'm at the top of the ticket. Those running to replace the Republican members of Congress who've resigned in Texas because they can see the writing on the wall, they're helped if there's a Texan at the top of the ticket. So I think I can do the most good in the position that I'm pursuing. And look, I want to be president. I want to be the president this country needs. I want to make sure that we come together, we bring people in, and that we meet the greatest set of challenges that we've ever faced and fully live up to this country's promise.
How long was Beto here? What's the time?
40 minutes.
Just want the record to show Mayor Pete's been here twice. He gave us way more time. Just want to throw that out
Oh,
there.
my
No
goodness.
pressure on you. Just want to
Say
throw
what
that
the
out
fuck?
there.
No, I'm kidding.
Just want to throw that out there.
Well, we appreciate
I
you for
appreciate
joining
you
us.
having me on. A
All
huge
right.
honor to be with you.
Thank
I'm
you for
grateful
coming.
for the opportunity.
That's right.
Yeah,
It's-
thank you.
it's Beto O'Rourke. Did I say it right?
You said it perfectly.
Beto.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.